In a world where royal children are trained from birth to maintain perfect composure, where even the slightest crack in their polished facade makes international headlines, something unprecedented happened on that crisp autumn morning in London. The cameras were rolling, millions of viewers were watching around the globe, and then Princess Charlotte, the little girl who had charmed the world with her confident waves and cheeky grins, did something no one expected. She broke. Not the kind of breaking that comes with scraped knees or lost toys, but the profound, soul-deep kind that happens when a young heart can no longer carry the weight placed upon it. In front of the entire world, Britain's beloved princess showed us something we had never seen before: the raw, unfiltered emotion of a child who had been carrying far more than anyone realized. What happened next would not only move viewers to tears, but spark a global conversation about childhood, pressure, and what we really expect from those born into extraordinary circumstances. This is the true story of a moment that reminded us all that beneath the tiaras and titles, royal children are still just children, with all the vulnerability and strength that comes with being human. Charlotte Elizabeth Diana had always been different from her brothers. While Prince George carried himself with the serious demeanor expected of a future king, and Prince Louis bounced through life with infectious joy, Charlotte possessed something else entirely, a spark that seemed to light up every room she entered. From her first public appearance as a tiny baby in her mother's arms, the world had been captivated by this little princess who seemed to understand her role in ways that surprised even her parents. The morning of October 15th started like any other royal engagement day at Kensington Palace. Charlotte woke up in her bedroom, decorated with soft pink walls and pictures of horses, her latest obsession. She had been riding for 2 years now, much to the delight of her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who had passed down her love of horses to yet another generation. Charlotte's riding instructor, Mrs. Peterson, often remarked that the young princess had natural talent that reminded her of the Queen herself at that age. Kate, the Princess of Wales, knocked gently on Charlotte's door at 7 in the morning. Today was the annual Children's Mental Health Awareness event, where Charlotte would join her parents in meeting young people who had overcome various challenges. It was meant to be an inspiring day, showcasing how the royal family supported causes close to their hearts. Charlotte had been looking forward to it for weeks, practicing her handshakes and the proper way to ask questions that showed genuine interest. The little princess bounced out of bed with her usual energy, her long brown hair cascading over her shoulders. She had inherited her mother's beautiful locks and her father's expressive eyes, a combination that made her photographs absolutely stunning. The royal photographers always commented on how natural she looked in front of cameras, never shy or awkward like many children her age. "Good morning, sweetheart," Kate said, helping Charlotte pick out her outfit for the day. They settled on a navy blue dress with small white flowers, appropriate for the formal occasion, but still allowing Charlotte to feel comfortable and move freely. Charlotte loved this dress because it reminded her of the flowers in the palace gardens where she often played with her brothers. As they walked down the grand hallway toward the breakfast room, Charlotte chatted excitedly about the horses she had seen during their recent visit to Balmoral Castle. She had particularly bonded with a gentle mare named Duchess and had been asking her parents if they could arrange for more riding lessons. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Kate found herself smiling at her daughter's animated descriptions of galloping through the Scottish countryside. Prince William joined them for breakfast, looking formal in his navy suit, but relaxed as he listened to Charlotte's stories. He had always been amazed by his daughter's ability to remember every detail of her experiences and share them with such vivid enthusiasm. Charlotte was a natural storyteller, something that would serve her well in her future royal duties, but also made her incredibly endearing to everyone she met. The breakfast conversation flowed easily between discussions of Charlotte's upcoming school projects, plans for the weekend, and gentle reminders about today's engagement. William and Kate had always tried to prepare their children for public appearances without making them feel pressured or anxious. They explained what would happen, who they would meet, and what was expected, but always emphasized that the most important thing was for Charlotte to be herself. Charlotte listened carefully as her father explained that they would be meeting children and teenagers who had faced difficult times in their lives, Some had dealt with sadness, worry, or fear, but had found ways to feel better with help from caring adults. She nodded seriously, understanding that this was important work, and asked thoughtful questions about how she could make the young people feel comfortable and welcome. After breakfast, Charlotte spent time with her private tutor, working on her reading and mathematics. Education was a priority in the Wales household, and despite their royal duties, William and Kate insisted that their children maintain regular study schedules. Charlotte was an excellent student, curious about everything, and always asking questions that sometimes stumped even her well-educated tutor. The royal styling team arrived at 10 o'clock to help Charlotte with her final preparations. Her hair was brushed until it shone, then styled in loose waves that framed her face beautifully. A small amount of clear lip gloss was applied, just enough to look polished for the cameras without making her look older than her years. Charlotte enjoyed these preparations, often pretending she was getting ready for a grand ball like the princesses in her favorite storybooks. The media had been buzzing about today's event for weeks. Princess Charlotte had become increasingly popular with the public, her confident demeanor and genuine smile making her a favorite subject for royal photographers and journalists. Magazines often featured her on their covers, praising her poise and natural charm. The pressure of this attention was something her parents tried to shield her from, but Charlotte seemed to handle it with remarkable grace for someone so young. As the morning progressed, Charlotte practiced her greetings and small talk with her mother. They role-played meeting different types of people, from shy children who might be nervous around royalty to confident teenagers who might have lots of questions about palace life. Charlotte was a quick learner and seemed to genuinely enjoy these practice sessions, often suggesting her own ideas for making people feel welcome and comfortable. The car arrived at 11:30 to take them to the mental health facility in central London. Charlotte climbed into the back seat between her parents, carefully arranging her dress so it wouldn't wrinkle. She looked out the window as they drove through London's busy streets, waving occasionally at people who recognized the royal vehicle and cheered from the sidewalks. During the drive, Kate reviewed the schedule one more time. They would first meet with the facility's directors and key staff members, then visit several different areas where young people participated in various therapy and support programs. Charlotte would have opportunities to join in some activities, ask questions, and simply spend time talking with the children and teenagers they met. Charlotte listened attentively, but found herself feeling slightly nervous for the first time. This was different from visiting schools or hospitals where the activities were more straightforward. Today they would be talking about difficult emotions and challenging experiences, topics that Charlotte was beginning to understand were more complex than she had realized. The media convoy that followed their car was larger than usual, with photographers and journalists from around the world covering the event. This level of attention had become normal for Charlotte, but today something felt different. Perhaps it was the serious nature of the cause they were supporting, or maybe it was her growing awareness of the weight of expectations placed on her young shoulders. As they approached the facility, Charlotte could see crowds of people gathered behind barriers, many holding flowers and small gifts. She smiled and prepared to wave, just as she had been taught, but noticed that some of the people in the crowd looked sad or worried. Her mother squeezed her hand gently and reminded her that many of the people here had personal connections to mental health challenges. They weren't just here to see royalty, but because this cause meant something important to them. The car pulled up to the main entrance, where facility staff and local officials waited to greet them. Charlotte took a deep breath, smoothed her dress one final time, and prepared to step out into the bright lights of the cameras and the watchful eyes of the world. She had no way of knowing that in just a few hours, this day would become one of the most memorable and impactful moments of her young life. The security team gave the all-clear signal, and the car doors opened. William stepped out first, followed by Kate, and then Charlotte emerged into the bright October sunshine. The cameras immediately began clicking rapidly, capturing every angle of the young princess as she straightened her shoulders and prepared to begin another royal engagement. To everyone watching, she looked like the picture of royal perfection, confident, beautiful, and ready to charm everyone she met. But beneath that polished exterior, Charlotte was about to embark on an experience that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her role, and the weight of expectations that came with being born into the most famous family in the world. The perfect princess facade was about to meet the complicated reality of human emotion, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The first few hours of the engagement proceeded exactly as planned. Charlotte walked confidently beside her parents as they toured the facility, her small hand occasionally reaching for her mother's when meeting new people, but always maintaining the composure that had made her such a media darling. The facility directors were clearly delighted to have the royal family visiting, and Charlotte charmed them with her thoughtful questions about the programs they offered. In the art therapy room, Charlotte sat cross-legged on the floor with a group of 8- and 9-year-olds, carefully painting flowers on a large canvas that would be displayed in the facility's main hallway. The children around her were participants in the program, some dealing with anxiety, others working through family difficulties, and several who had experienced trauma that required ongoing support. Charlotte listened intently as they shared their stories, her young mind trying to process experiences that seemed impossibly heavy for people her own age. One little girl named Sophie told Charlotte about how painting helped her feel better when she missed her daddy, who was deployed overseas with the military. Another child, Marcus, explained how he used art to express feelings he couldn't put into words after his parents' divorce. Charlotte nodded seriously, offering gentle encouragement and asking follow-up questions that showed genuine care and interest. The cameras captured every moment, and the photographers were getting exactly the kind of heartwarming images they had hoped for. Princess Charlotte looked beautiful and compassionate, engaging naturally with children who needed support and showing that the royal family cared about mental health issues affecting young people. The images would be perfect for the front pages of newspapers around the world. But as the morning progressed, Charlotte began to feel something she had never experienced during a public engagement before. The stories she was hearing were staying with her in a way that surprised her. Usually, she could smile and listen and then move on to the next activity without the conversations affecting her deeply. Today was different. Every child she met seemed to be carrying something heavy, and Charlotte found herself wondering what it would feel like to have those kinds of worries. During a visit to the music therapy room, Charlotte met a teenager named Emma who was about 15 years old. Emma had been dealing with severe anxiety and depression for several years, and she spoke openly about how difficult it had been to maintain normal activities like school and friendships while managing her mental health challenges. She thanked Charlotte for visiting and said it meant a lot to young people like her to know that important people cared about their struggles. Charlotte smiled and responded appropriately, but something in Emma's words hit her unexpectedly hard. The idea that people her age could feel so overwhelmed and sad made her chest feel tight in a way she didn't understand. She had always lived in a world where problems were solved quickly and efficiently, where any sadness or worry she experienced was immediately addressed by loving parents and a team of people dedicated to her well-being. The next stop was the group therapy room, where Charlotte observed a session designed for younger children. The therapist, Dr. Martinez, was leading a discussion about feelings and how to express them in healthy ways. The children sat in a circle, taking turns sharing something that had made them feel worried or sad recently, and then talking about strategies they could use to feel better. Charlotte was invited to join the circle, and she sat carefully in her navy dress, folding her hands in her lap as she had been taught. When it came time for her turn to share, she paused for a moment, unsure what to say. Her life was so different from these children's experiences that she felt almost guilty for taking up space in their circle. How could she share her small worries about school tests or sibling squabbles when these children were dealing with such serious challenges? "Sometimes I worry about doing the right thing," Charlotte said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "There are always a lot of people watching, and I want to make sure I don't disappoint anyone." The words came out before she really thought about them, and she was surprised by how honest they sounded. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully and asked Charlotte to say more about that feeling. Charlotte found herself explaining that sometimes it felt like there were so many people expecting her to be perfect that she worried about making mistakes. She talked about how she practiced conversations and worried about saying the wrong thing or not being interesting enough during public appearances. The other children in the group listened with surprising understanding. One boy named Tyler said he felt the same way at school, where he worried that his teachers and classmates were always judging him. A little girl named Sarah shared that she sometimes felt pressure to act happy even when she was sad because she didn't want to upset her mom, who was already dealing with a lot of stress. Charlotte realized that even though their situations were very different, these children understood something about pressure and expectations that she had never been able to put into words before. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and understood by people her own age, and it was both comforting and overwhelming. The cameras continued rolling throughout this session, but Charlotte had almost forgotten they were there. She was so engaged in the conversation and the connections she was making with these children that the usual awareness of being watched and photographed faded into the background. She laughed genuinely at Tyler's jokes, offered comfort when Sarah started to tear up, and shared more about her own experiences than she ever had in public before. William and Kate watched from the doorway, both surprised and proud of their daughter's authentic engagement with the group. They could see that Charlotte was having a meaningful experience, but they also noticed something different in her demeanor, a seriousness and vulnerability that they hadn't seen during previous public appearances. After the group session ended, Charlotte walked with her parents to the facility's main conference room, where they would meet with staff and board members for a brief presentation about the programs and their impact on young people in the community. Charlotte usually enjoyed these formal parts of engagements because they required less emotional energy and allowed her to practice her polite listening skills. But today, she found it difficult to focus on the statistics and program descriptions being shared. Her mind kept returning to the conversations she had just had with the children in the therapy group. She thought about Emma's description of feeling anxious about normal activities, Tyler's worry about being judged, and Sarah's pressure to appear happy when she felt sad. The facility director was explaining how early intervention and support could make a tremendous difference in young people's mental health outcomes when Charlotte suddenly felt a wave of emotion she couldn't identify. It wasn't sadness exactly, but it wasn't happiness either. It felt like something big and overwhelming was settling in her chest, making it difficult to breathe normally. She tried to use the techniques her parents had taught her for managing nerves during public appearances, taking deep breaths, focusing on her posture, and reminding herself that she was safe and supported. But this feeling was different from simple nervousness. It felt like she was carrying something heavy that didn't belong to her, but that she couldn't put down. Kate noticed her daughter shifting uncomfortably in her chair and leaned over to whisper, "Are you feeling all right, sweetheart?" Charlotte nodded and tried to smile, but her mother could see that something was bothering her. Kate made a mental note to check in with Charlotte more thoroughly once they had a private moment. The presentation continued for another 20 minutes, with Charlotte doing her best to appear engaged and interested. She asked one polite question about how families could support children who were struggling, and she thanked the staff for their important work. To everyone in the room, she appeared to be handling the engagement beautifully, just as she always did. But inside, Charlotte felt like something fundamental had shifted. The conversations she had shared with the children had opened a door to feelings and thoughts she had never explored before. She was beginning to understand that the pressure she sometimes felt wasn't unusual or wrong. It was something that many young people experienced, and it was okay to acknowledge those feelings rather than simply pushing them aside. As they prepared to move to the final part of the engagement, a brief outdoor ceremony where Charlotte would help plant a tree in the facility's garden, she found herself thinking about all the expectations placed on her every day. The pressure to look perfect, say the right things, represent her family with grace, and never show weakness or uncertainty in public. For the first time, these expectations felt overwhelming rather than simply challenging. Charlotte realized that she had been working so hard to be the perfect princess that she had never really thought about what she actually felt or needed. The children she had met today had been honest about their struggles and feelings, and their openness had made her aware of how much she kept hidden, even from herself. The outdoor ceremony was meant to be the highlight of the day, a symbolic gesture of growth and hope that would provide beautiful photo opportunities a positive ending to the royal visit. Charlotte had participated in similar tree planting ceremonies before and always enjoyed them. Today, however, as she walked toward the garden with her parents and the gathered crowd of media and staff, she felt the weight of all those watching eyes in a way she never had before. The pressure that had been building throughout the day was about to reach a breaking point, and Charlotte had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, she would experience a moment that would change not only her own understanding of herself, but also the way the world saw her. The garden ceremony was set to be the perfect conclusion to what had been deemed a successful royal engagement. Charlotte stood next to a small oak sapling, holding a silver spade that had been specially engraved for the occasion. The October sun cast a golden light across the facility's garden, and dozens of photographers positioned themselves to capture the moment when Princess Charlotte would help plant what the facility director called a tree of hope. The symbolism was beautiful and intentional. Just as this tree would grow strong and provide shelter for others, the programs at the facility helped young people develop resilience and support systems that would serve them throughout their lives. Charlotte understood the meaning behind the ceremony and had been looking forward to this moment all week. But as she stood there, surrounded by cameras and microphones, with staff members, board members, and media representatives all watching expectantly, something inside her began to crack. The conversations from earlier in the day kept replaying in her mind. Tyler's worry about being judged, Sarah's pressure to appear happy when she felt sad, Emma's description of anxiety making normal activities feel impossible. Charlotte realized that she was standing in front of all these people, expected to be the perfect symbol of hope and royal grace, while feeling more confused and overwhelmed than she ever had in her life. The weight of expectations that had been building all day suddenly felt crushing. Every smile she had given, every polite response she had offered, every perfectly timed wave and gracious thank you. It all felt like a performance that was exhausting her in ways she was only now beginning to understand. The facility director began speaking about the significance of the tree planting ceremony, explaining how the oak would grow alongside the young people who received support at the facility. Charlotte tried to focus on his words, but her mind kept drifting to the therapy session where she had been more honest about her feelings than she had ever been in public before. In that circle with the other children, she had felt understood and accepted for who she really was, not for how well she could perform her royal role. The contrast between that authentic connection and this formal ceremony was stark, and Charlotte found herself wondering why she couldn't always be as real and honest as she had been in that room. William began his speech about the importance of mental health support for young people, praising the facility's work and emphasizing the royal family's commitment to these issues. Charlotte knew she was supposed to be listening carefully so she could make appropriate comments when it was her turn to speak, but the pressure in her chest was growing stronger. She looked out at the crowd of faces all focused on her family, and, for the first time, the attention felt intrusive rather than warmly supportive. Every camera lens pointed in her direction felt like an invasion of privacy. Every expectant expression in the crowd felt like a demand for her to be something she wasn't sure she could be anymore. Charlotte had always been able to compartmentalize her feelings during public appearances, to push aside any nervousness or discomfort and focus on the task at hand. But the conversations from earlier had stirred something in her that couldn't be easily contained. She was feeling things she didn't have words for, emotions that didn't fit neatly into the categories of appropriate royal behavior. Kate finished her portion of the ceremony remarks, speaking beautifully about the resilience of young people and the importance of creating safe spaces where children could express their feelings without judgment. The irony wasn't lost on Charlotte. Her mother was advocating for emotional honesty and vulnerability, while Charlotte herself felt trapped by expectations to maintain perfect composure regardless of what she was actually experiencing. When it came time for Charlotte to approach the tree and begin the ceremonial planting, she walked forward slowly, still holding the engraved spade. The photographers moved closer, their camera shutters clicking rapidly as they captured her every movement. Charlotte knelt down next to the small oak sapling, just as she had been instructed during the morning briefing. But, as she placed the spade in the soil, something unexpected happened. The weight of the day, the stories she had heard, the connections she had made, the pressure she had always carried but never acknowledged, suddenly became too much to bear. Charlotte felt her chest tighten and her breathing become shallow. The perfectly controlled facade she had maintained for years began to crumble. Tears started forming in her eyes, and, at first, Charlotte tried to blink them away. She had been taught that crying in public was something to be avoided except in very specific circumstances, like during memorial services or particularly moving ceremonies. This tree planting was supposed to be hopeful and uplifting, not emotional in a way that would make her lose composure. But the tears wouldn't stop. In fact, they began falling more rapidly, rolling down her cheeks as she knelt in the garden soil with cameras recording her every movement. Charlotte realized with growing panic that she couldn't control what was happening to her. All the feelings she had pushed down for years were rising to the surface at the worst possible moment. The clicking of camera shutters seemed to grow louder, and Charlotte became acutely aware that this moment of vulnerability was being documented by dozens of photographers who would share these images with millions of people around the world. The thought of her breakdown being broadcast globally only made her emotional state worse. William and Kate immediately noticed their daughter's distress, but they were in a difficult position. Moving to comfort her would draw even more attention to her emotional state, but leaving her to cope alone felt impossible. Kate took a step closer to Charlotte while maintaining her own composure, ready to provide support while trying to minimize the disruption to the ceremony. Charlotte tried to continue with the tree planting, thinking that if she could just finish the task, she could regain control of her emotions. But her hands were shaking as she attempted to move soil around the sapling, and her tears were falling steadily now. She could hear murmurs from the crowd, and she knew that everyone could see she was struggling. The facility director, Dr. Martinez from the therapy session, and several staff members watched with concern and understanding. They recognized what was happening. Charlotte was experiencing an emotional breakthrough, similar to what they witnessed regularly with the young people in their programs. But they also understood the unique challenges of having such a moment while in the public eye. Dr. Martinez made a quick decision to approach Charlotte, not as someone trying to manage a public relations situation, but as a mental health professional who recognized a young person in distress. She knelt down next to Charlotte and spoke quietly, offering the same kind of gentle support she would provide to any child experiencing overwhelming emotions. "It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling right now," Dr. Martinez said softly, her voice barely audible to the cameras, but clearly heard by Charlotte. "What you experienced today was real, and it's normal for those feelings to need expression. You don't have to hold everything inside." Charlotte looked up at Dr. Martinez through her tears, and something in the woman's kind, understanding expression helped her realize that maybe this breakdown wasn't a failure or something to be ashamed of. Maybe it was what Tyler and Sarah and Emma had been talking about, the importance of acknowledging and expressing feelings rather than keeping them buried. With that realization, Charlotte stopped trying to fight the tears. She let herself feel the full weight of everything that had been building up, not just from this day, but from years of pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness, to always represent her family with grace regardless of what she was experiencing internally. The cameras continued recording as Princess Charlotte sat in the garden soil, crying openly for the first time in her public life. But something remarkable was happening in that moment of vulnerability. Instead of looking weak or unprepared for her royal role, Charlotte looked profoundly human. She looked like exactly what she was, a young person processing complex emotions and learning to cope with feelings that were too big to contain. The breakdown that had started as Charlotte's worst nightmare was beginning to transform into something else entirely. She was discovering that authenticity didn't make her less capable of fulfilling her duties. It made her more relatable, more genuine, and ultimately more inspiring to the millions of people who would see this moment and recognize something of their own struggles in her tears. But Charlotte didn't know any of that yet. In that moment, she was simply a young girl who had reached her breaking point, finally allowing herself to feel and express emotions that had been building for years. And for the first time in her life, that felt like the most honest thing she had ever done. Within minutes of Charlotte's emotional moment being captured on camera, something unprecedented began happening across social media platforms worldwide. The images and video footage of the young princess breaking down during the tree planting ceremony spread faster than any royal news story in recent memory. But the response was unlike anything the royal family's communications team had ever experienced. Instead of criticism or concern about Charlotte's loss of composure, the overwhelming reaction was one of admiration, empathy, and support. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok were flooded with messages praising Charlotte's authenticity and expressing gratitude for her willingness to show genuine emotion in public. Parents shared stories of their own children struggling with pressure and expectations. Teachers posted about the importance of allowing young people to express their feelings honestly. The hashtag #RealPrincessCharlotte began trending globally within an hour of the footage being broadcast. Mental health organizations worldwide shared the images with messages about the normalcy and importance of emotional expression. Child psychologists were interviewed by news programs, explaining how Charlotte's public vulnerability could actually help other young people feel less alone in their own struggles. Back at the facility, Charlotte had been gently escorted to a private room where she could compose herself away from the cameras and crowds. Kate sat beside her daughter on a comfortable sofa, holding her hand and speaking softly about the courage it had taken to be so honest about her feelings. William paced quietly nearby, fielding urgent phone calls from Buckingham Palace communications staff who were trying to manage the rapidly evolving media situation. Charlotte felt embarrassed and worried about disappointing her family and the people who had been counting on her to handle the engagement perfectly. She had stopped crying, but her emotions still felt raw and overwhelming. Dr. Martinez had stayed with the family, offering professional perspective on what Charlotte had experienced and helping her understand that emotional breakthroughs were actually signs of growth and self-awareness rather than failures. "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong today," Kate reassured her daughter, brushing a strand of hair away from Charlotte's face. "In fact, you did something incredibly brave. You showed the world that it's okay to have feelings and to let those feelings show sometimes." Charlotte wasn't convinced. She had spent years learning how to maintain royal protocol and represent her family with dignity. Breaking down in tears in front of dozens of cameras felt like the opposite of everything she had been taught about public behavior. She worried that she had embarrassed her parents and failed in her responsibilities as a member of the royal family. But as reports began coming in from around the world, a different picture started to emerge. The Kensington Palace communications team was being overwhelmed with positive responses from the public. Letters, emails, and social media messages were pouring in from people of all ages who had been moved by Charlotte's authentic display of emotion. A letter from a 10-year-old girl in Australia said, "Thank you, Princess Charlotte, for showing me that it's okay to cry when things feel too big. I always try to be brave like you, but sometimes I feel sad, and now I know that's normal too." A message from a parent in Canada read, "My daughter has been struggling with anxiety, and seeing Princess Charlotte be real about her feelings has helped us have important conversations about emotions and pressure." Mental health advocates were calling Charlotte's breakdown a breakthrough moment for destigmatizing emotional expression among young people. Dr. Sarah Thompson, a prominent child psychologist, told the BBC, "What Princess Charlotte did today was incredibly powerful. She showed millions of young people that having feelings isn't a weakness. It's part of being human. Her vulnerability will help more children than any perfectly executed royal engagement ever could." As the afternoon progressed, Charlotte gradually began to understand the impact her emotional moment was having. Her parents showed her some of the positive responses, carefully selected to help her see that her authenticity was being celebrated rather than criticized. The facility staff shared stories of how young people in their programs were already talking about Princess Charlotte's courage in expressing her feelings publicly. Tyler, the boy from the therapy session who had talked about worrying what others thought of him, asked if he could speak with Charlotte before she left. When they met again in the art therapy room, he thanked her for being honest about her own pressures and worries. "It made me feel less weird about my feelings," he told her. "If even a princess gets overwhelmed sometimes, maybe it really is okay for regular kids like me to feel that way too." Emma, the teenager who had shared her struggles with anxiety, also sought out Charlotte before the royal family departed. "You probably don't realize this," Emma said, "but what you did today is going to help so many young people feel less alone. I've been in therapy for 2 years, and I still sometimes feel ashamed about having anxiety. Seeing you be real about feeling overwhelmed makes me feel like maybe I don't have to hide my struggles either." These conversations began to shift Charlotte's perspective on what had happened during the ceremony. Instead of seeing her emotional breakdown as a failure, she started to understand it as a moment of genuine connection with people who needed to see that even someone in her privileged position experienced difficult feelings sometimes. The media coverage continued to evolve throughout the evening, with royal correspondents noting that this was a new kind of royal engagement, one where vulnerability and authenticity had created more meaningful impact than traditional protocol might have achieved. Television programs were featuring discussions about childhood pressure, the importance of emotional literacy, and the ways that public figures could use their platforms to normalize conversations about mental health. International news outlets were running headlines like "Princess Charlotte's Brave Moment," "A Royal Breakdown That Built Others Up," and "When Perfect Protocol Gave Way to Perfect Humanity." The coverage wasn't focused on Charlotte's loss of control, but rather on her courage in showing genuine emotion and the positive impact that authenticity had on young people around the world. Child development experts were praising the royal family's handling of the situation, noting that Kate and William had provided comfort without rushing to hide or minimize their daughter's emotional experience. Their response demonstrated healthy approaches to supporting children through difficult moments rather than demanding immediate composure or emotional suppression. That evening, as Charlotte prepared for bed, she reflected on the day's events with a new understanding of what had transpired. The breakdown that had felt like her worst nightmare had somehow become something positive and meaningful. She was beginning to see that her role as a princess might involve more than just following protocol and maintaining perfect appearances. It might also include being honest about the human experience in ways that could help others feel less alone. Kate tucked Charlotte into bed, and they talked quietly about the day's events. Charlotte admitted that she still felt confused about many of the emotions she had experienced, but that she was glad she hadn't hidden them completely. "I think those kids today needed to see that I have feelings too," Charlotte said thoughtfully. "Maybe that's part of helping people, not just visiting places and cutting ribbons, but showing them that we're all dealing with hard things sometimes." The response to Charlotte's authentic moment continued building throughout the night, with mental health organizations reporting increased calls to their support lines from young people who felt inspired to reach out for help. Parents shared stories of improved communication with their children about emotions and pressure. Teachers noted students expressing more willingness to discuss their feelings rather than pretending everything was always fine. What had started as Princess Charlotte's most difficult public moment was transforming into one of the most impactful royal engagements in recent history. Not because everything had gone according to plan, but because when the plan fell apart, something real and meaningful had taken its place. Charlotte fell asleep that night with a new understanding of herself and her role in the world. She was still a princess with important responsibilities and public duties to fulfill, but she was also a young person with real feelings and struggles, and maybe, just maybe, those two things didn't have to be in conflict with each other. Perhaps the most royal thing she could do was continue being authentically human, even when the whole world was watching.